All right. Well, we are recording, my friend. Tommy, thanks for joining me, man. How you doing?
Good. I'm doing great. Thanks for hosting. Thanks for having me. And I just like a question from me to you. I mean, did you always grow up, or did you always want to start your podcast? Do you always want to have like interviewers coming in? I asked this because one of my crew guys, Adam Chick, he was my crew chief when I was going through amateur racing. And he says, hey, like, my dream is to open up a bar just because I love talking to so many different people. So I'm kind of like, I wonder if that's the case for you too. You like just like all these different new experiences, stories, all that.
I mean, you're spot on there. I love it. Yeah, it kind of started off as a joke with this podcast stuff. Was during the pandemic, everyone was looking for a hobby, something to do, and I was streaming on Twitch video games. And one time, me and my buddy had mics, and we said, "Well, why don't we just like go live and just talk nonsense?
Yeah.
Why not?" And it started there, and we started doing it, every week, every couple of weeks, and people were actually watching, tuning in, like, "Hey, you start editing it, start putting it on YouTube, right?" And I realized, okay, well, this is kind of fun. I love to talk,
Yeah.
So now fast forward to kind of where I'm at now. That's exactly what's morphed into. I'm a big people's person. I love meeting people, love hearing people's stories. Like, I want to bring people in that are in unique life positions, and whether it's job, hobby, sport, talent, or even heightened knowledge. Bring them on to talk and share your story. And, here you are right now, you're a prime example. And so, yeah, that's what it's turned into. And so it's kind of just going wherever it runs with. I'm lucky I've been able to build this studio and set it up the way that I wanted.
No, it's great, yeah.
I just love talking to people and hearing their stories, even outside of, the microphones and the cameras. I love that in my personal life too. So that's exactly what it is. So you're spot on there. And at the bar, that makes me think of it too. I would love to do something like that someday too.
Yeah.
Build a bar, same exact idea, and own a bar. All the people you meet, it's so cool, right? So tell me, let's get into you, man. So tell me a little about yourself. So flat out, straight to the point, you're a race car driver.
Yeah.
Is that the title you slap on it?
Yeah, so I'm a race car driver. I've been professionally racing since I was 18. And as of this year, I'm also the youngest team owner in the U.S., professional team owner in the U.S. But I started at 3 years old. I started go-karts at 3 years old, which is kind of crazy to say. My grandfather actually mounted a baby seat in my go-kart. And then he even made, it's called a rack and pinion steering system.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a assisted power unit for steering, which is usually put in like midgets or like sprint cars or bigger forms of racing. But he kind of packaged it into a small go-kart. So when I was at 3 years old, I didn't have the muscle mass to turn the go-kart wheel. So that power unit made it able, or that steering system made it able to, for my small body to turn it. So I started go-karting at 3, which is kind of unheard of.
So at 3 years old, I mean, can you even reach the pedals, yet alone turn the wheel, right?
Yeah, we had pedal extensions. He painted the gas pedal green, the brake pedal red, so I knew. Just visual cues.
I love it.
But yeah, so I started practicing at 3. I started actual racing go-karts at 5. By the time I think I was 14, I won 7 national championships in go-karting. And I don't know if I should say this part or not, but I will just for the pod, unreleased.
I love it.
My dad, when I was 15, still had his professional racing license. He still had his amateur racing license. All that stuff was up to date for him. So what he would do is, I'm not going to say what, but he'd enter me into certain race events, or he'd enter himself into certain race events under his licensing. These weren't pro events. These were amateur events.
Okay.
Just me trying to get track time in real cars. And he would enter these events under his license. He'd go in the trailer, and then I'd come out with the helmet and the suit on because you couldn't tell the difference. And I'd go on the track and I'd start racing. It was pretty nuts. And I was actually doing well. I was taking like 6th place finishes against like people who were my dad's age, literally.
And you were how old, you said?
I was 15, racing against people who were like 30, 28, people who have been around and have like established careers at that moment.
So you walk out the trailer, tracksuit on, visor down, everything. You can't see nothing.
Literally, I was like the most non-social race car driver, but it isn't my dad's name. So
right.
My dad had an attitude when he raced. If you look up old YouTube videos of him when he raced in Pirelli World Challenge in 2001, or even NASCAR trucks and all that, there's a commentator talking about his I think it was NASCAR K&N West race. Or now it's called K&N West. I don't know what it was called then. Where the announcer said, "Hey, Tim McCarthy's hit everything but the lottery today because every panel on my dad's car, every bumper was damaged from when he was pushing people out of the way because he was very aggressive like that,
I love that.
So yeah, I'd go out in the races, and I got caught once where there was this tragic crash, and they told all the cars to stop on track because they needed to get the ambulance out there as soon as possible. And we were sitting there, and we're wearing like these 6-layered fire suits. And the staff at one point, because it was so adjourned for a little over an hour. It's common for drivers to get heat stroke when we're not moving, when you're sitting in the car just sweating. So the staff started handing out waters to the cars who were stopped on track, and they came up to me, and I was supposed to be like, I'm registered as like a 45-year-old guy, oh, no. And they look at my visor and they're like, wait, I swear to God, that's a kid. It has to be a kid in there. So they pulled me aside and they said, hey, like, we're not going to talk about this. We're going to mention this because like we don't want any repercussions, but like that you have to come back when you're 16 because that's when you're allowed to enter this racing series with their insurance provider and all that. And my next race I was 16 anyways, thank God. So yeah.
So I mean, it's not like you're breaking the rules absurdly. You're a couple months off. Like at that point.
Yeah, at that point, yeah.
Just pushing the envelope a little bit.
Exactly.
Got to, right? But hey, that's racing, right? I mean, that's kind of on brand. You're pushing that envelope constantly.
That's all it is, yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about your dad, kinda, and I've did a little bit of my homework on the McCarthy website and whatnot. So tell me about the McCarthy family history, because it seems like there's a lot behind that in racing, right?
Yeah. So my racing heritage is kind of old school, I guess. My grandfather, he started off as a farmer in Illinois, and he ran away from home and came to California with like a few bucks to his name, worked a bunch of odd jobs. He was buying like old used police cars and stuff like that to get around. And he even, I think there's a story of him buying a police car and rigging it up to tow a trailer to get his cars to the track. Because my grandfather always liked motorsports, where he was racing tractors in Illinois and whatnot. So when he came here, he wanted to find any means necessary to get behind a wheel. So he started SCCA amateur racing and got up pretty far in the amateur levels. And there's even a joke where I think there was 6 years in a row he was leading the last lap of the runoffs. That's an SCCA national top of the line amateur event. Yeah. And he led the last lap 6 years in a row, but never won it. He had his engine would blow up, his throttle linkage, because back then they had literally a cable going from your throttle, your gas pedal, to the engine to pull the throttle body open to accelerate, and that cable broke. Oh. So he had all these like crazy weird situations always happen on the last lap when he was leading that race. So he was unable to get a runoffs champion. But he started my dad when my dad was like 17. My dad started in SCCA amateur racing, and he went from there to NASCAR. He made a leap to NASCAR trucks. He did a couple races in NASCAR trucks. He raced for Steve Dinan, which is a BMW team, in World Challenge, and then he tried to privateer his own team with the Mercedes and a couple other cars too. So that's neat.
How do you mentioned NASCAR? So for me growing up, I feel like every, especially kid growing up, loved cars, race cars, NASCAR. I grew up, my grandpa was obsessed with NASCAR, so naturally I was too. Kevin Harvick, Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, all those guys. Point is how do you get into NASCAR? I feel like with racing as a whole, you start with, the go-karts, right? You mentioned. Yeah. So your dad got into NASCAR truck racing series. What's the door in to get into NASCAR?
So this is kind of gonna, for people who don't know the route of motorsports or are unfamiliar, it's not like nothing else in sports. It's uncomparable because there's so many different series. You go from go-karts, you can do dirt track racing, you can do circle track racing. And in each one of those disciplines, there's many different series. And circle track racing in the amateur levels, you have BCRA, you have USAC. There's even small levels where it's Quarter Majors America, which is no longer. But you have all these different series who can, like USAC and BCRA, field the exact same equipment, exact same cars. And it's some drivers only do some series, some drivers only do other series, so it's hard to stack them up. And at the same time, in NASCAR, you have like 43 spots for the entire U.S. or for the entire world, because there's other people who are trying to get into it from other countries now. So it's very competitive. And at the same time, there's also what we call gentleman drivers, which is kind of a concept that's not in other sports as well. It'd be the equivalent would be if I wanted to start on as a starting QB on the Stanford football team, I would show up with $100,000 and I'd give it to the Stanford football team and I'd start that day.
Buy your way in.
Exactly. And buy your way in is huge in racing because it's such a costly sport to field a car for all the equipment, all the team behind it. Teams are very open to the idea of guaranteed ROI before they even show up. Because if you have a fast driver who's going to win every weekend, or you hope can win every weekend, it's almost a gamble because there's a lot of crashes that happen that are kind of unavoidable in NASCAR.
Sure.
But if you could field a guy on your team who's going to be guaranteeing you money before you show up to the track and be making money, regardless, it's almost a no-brainer for some teams.
Guaranteed ROI. What is that?
Return on investment. So because you're
ROI. Got it. Sorry.
Yeah. So
Okay.
If you're spending for us in our Toyota GR Cup program, you could spend $20,000 a weekend just on tires, brakes, equipment. We've been kind of weaning it down a little bit, just to save costs. We're not going out on new tires every practice session. But some teams do. So there's always to an entry of each race money that's already gone because you have to the tire. You have to sign up for the tires. You have to pay the tires 2 weeks in advance. You have to pay for the gas 2 weeks in advance. You have to do all these order forms in advance. So you're showing up to the track and you've already spent the money. So you're hoping to do well, get sponsors, or there's many different ways to do it. But it's to get to the point, gentleman drivers are nice to have for some teams.
Yeah.
So when you're a professional race car driver, you're not only gunning for, if you're going for NASCAR, it's just not just you gunning for one of the 43 spots available in the whole NASCAR program for Cup. It's you gunning against all these great drivers who are also very talented. It's you gunning against all these guys who can front the bills, who are also enticing teams with all this money behind them saying, like, hey, like, if Tommy crashes one race, he cost the team X amount of thousands, where this guy could have just paid and just had a cakewalk for the team.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. Yeah.
It's crazy that the buy-in. It's almost, I think of, I'm a poker guy, right? I think about you're buying in, right? You're kind of it's an investment at the end of the day. It's not like any other sport. It sounds like you're talking about you got to buy your way in, and then it's based off performance. If you podium, right? And then if you podium, of course, the sponsorships will come.
Right.
On and so forth. It's beyond interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about the cup that you're in is the Toyota the GR Cup.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is GR, first of all? What does that stand for?
So GR is Gazoo Racing. It's
Okay.
Toyota's racing branch that they're making. It's kind of like the equivalent of AMG for Mercedes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. And so what got you to that point? Because you went from kart racing to, let me ask, what is the car that you're driving now called? Because I see it's a Toyota of some sort, right? And so what is those styles of cars called?
So the street equivalent would be the GR86,
Okay.
and it's somewhat modified from the street version just to make it more reliable on track to kind of endure the punishment. So the transmission is a sequential, so it's meant to be pounded on every lap. We have cooling fans on the diff, on the transmission. Just to keep everything cool, because there's not a moment where the car is not going to be living at redline. If you're trying to win, you know. So cooling is a big thing, and also safety too.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and the amount of production I feel like that has to go into race day. Talk about race day production. I mean, from the team, the car, everything. I can only imagine.
Yeah. So I've kind of spread myself thin a good amount, because when I was just racing as a race car driver, I mean, there's already so much going into it. You got to do all these ads for the sponsors, which you love to do, which you have to do because everyone's paying your bills. Because side note, if you win every single race throughout the entire year and the championship, that prize money will still not cover half your costs. You need sponsorships, you need company deals to be anywhere in racing.
What does that money look like? You said it's only going to cover half. I mean, is the spending that high, or is just the prize pool not there?
I'd say we're running one of the most lean budgets, and it's hovering on $500,000 for operating costs. if we won every single race and the championship, I think that'd give us south of 300,000.
Still doesn't.
So yeah, so it's all about brand deals, building the partnerships, and there's a lot of stuff that happens off the track too. Where we do driver coaching. I've kept all my other race cars that I've used to get me to this point, so we rent those out for people starting their career too. So there's a lot of back end that goes into it, and that's why when a race car driver is doing all these meetings, he has to put his best foot forward. And it's so yeah, I was a race car driver. I was going to all these, doing as much as I could to keep the sponsors happy. Like when they come to the track, I'd like greet them around, show them the race car, kind of bring all their people around. I'd introduce them to other people, because there's a lot of B2B at the race events, because each team has huge companies behind them to make everything happen. So a lot of companies like to sponsor motorsports teams to get introduced to other companies that they might have business with or could potentially have business with. So there's a lot of introductions that happen, especially in the hospitality areas. As a driver, you go through data, you go through video. It's like watching film.
Yeah.
And you have to watch film on all the drivers you're going against, see where they're aggressive, what corners they're best at, if they're better later in the race, earlier in the race. Some drivers have endurance problems because there's a lot of cardio that goes into it, especially in NASCAR too. Like NASCAR, you might think it's just going in circles, but the thing is too, you're pulling like 2 to 3 Gs 2 times a lap, and you're doing 400 laps. While you're wearing a 6-layered fire suit, the ambient temperature inside those cars, there's no firewall, there's no dampening of the heat, and the engine's right next to you, the transmission's right next to you. It's like 120 degrees Fahrenheit sometimes while you're wearing the 6-layer fire suit, while you're pulling G-force. So it's my dad was, when he was running NASCAR trucks, it was not uncommon for him to lose 6 pounds of water weight per event.
Oh my gosh. And how long are how long are they sitting in the car at a time, right? How, like the race?
Yeah. So in the GR Cup, I'm doing 45 minutes races, which is very nice to have. I've been doing endurance races and amateurs because I always try to practice harder than what I actually play at. Of course. If that makes
absolutely does.
Yeah. So I do amateur races to keep my muscle memory up. So I do like 25-hour endurance races. Of course, I'm not the only guy. We tag team it. We do driver changes. But there's a lot that goes into being physically prepared for something like this, and it's very niche too. Like you're not gonna see usually a race car driver who's a bodybuilder type. It's usually lean muscle mass with endurance is the type of build they go for. But to kind of go back to your question, on race day as a driver, you're going through film, you're going through data on the car, seeing how the car's performing. You're talking to your engineers constantly on what improvements can be made, because there's so many moving parts behind the car, and there's so many adjustments you can make, and the engineers can only go based off of what you tell them, because they're not the ones behind the car. They don't know the characteristics. Yes, they can look at data, but when you're going from practice to qualifying straight to the race in some of these touring car races or the races that we do with the GR Cup, it's like back to back to back. So they don't have time to really go fully in depth and look through all the data and kind of come up with their own solutions. They're really just relying on driver feedback. Right. So that's another skill set that also is developed. So there's a lot of running around the driver has to do, autograph sessions. There's driver meetings that we have to go through with the series. And if you miss the autograph session, if you miss the driver meetings from the series, you could be benched from the race or whatnot. So there's a lot of things that you're doing as a driver. And now that I'm also a team owner at the same time, and I'll get into why I did that later on, but as a team owner at the events, kind of making sure the crew's all on the same page. Even like I'll walk you through a morning to be give you the full rundown. What I've been doing is I get an Airbnb to store the whole team so everybody's not separated in different hotel rooms, because it's a logistical nightmare getting everybody herded up in the morning, you know. So we get big Airbnbs. We put everybody in 1 to 2 rental cars. We go to the track. We do the sign-ins at the front gate, make sure everybody has their passes, walk in. Certain amount of people will be going straight to the car. Certain amount of people will be going to the series meetings. Certain amount of people will be taking our old rims from the previous event to get new tires on. There's order forms that have to go in. There's briefings that have to be made. And if you miss any of the series briefings for the driver, for the team, for the crew chief, you have a potential to be benched. This isn't just the series I'm running in, SRO. It's NASCAR does this as well. I mean, if you miss any big meeting, you could usually it's a fine, but potentially be benched. And the worst thing about being benched is you already spent $10,000, $20,000 in advance to be here, and then you're not going to show. And not only did you lose that 20 grand, but sometimes you have sponsorship contracts that guarantee view time or air time, and you're not going to be on air, and that kind of puts you in a pickle too.
When you say bench, is that the equivalent like disqualification for the race that day? Is it same? Okay, got it. Yeah. And so,
exactly.
And is there penalties outside of that in the scenario? Let's say you got benched, other than of course the financial and sponsor side. They would hate to see that, but I'm talking about as far as the punishment outside of that. Will the Cup want to do? Into future races, like, oh, you have a suspension or something like that. Is there anything like that? Or
usually they like to fine. They start off with fines.
Oh, lovely. More money down.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And if they see that you're not really taking it seriously, because some of the teams racing against are multi-million-dollar operations, and we've seen in many cases they just take fines because it's more beneficial for them to be in other places at other times, or for them to be doing other situations, and they'll just pay a fine because they can.
Yeah.
Some of the teams that are well established, have been around for so long, they have so much big backing and sponsors behind them. I mean, there's a funny thing is one of the teams we're at the track with is sponsored by OnlyFans, so it's pretty funny to see them there. But it just kind of goes to show like the amount of money that's there. CrowdStrike is there, Amazon Web Service is there, all these big companies. So it's sometimes when fines aren't doing it, they'll resort to other things like benching or things like that.
Got it. They'll just pull the plug on it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you are all over the place on race day.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
And then you're because. I don't know if you want to get into it yet, but on top of that, you're the owner of this team, right?
Yeah.
And the driver. Usually, the owner plays a part in all that stuff, and all the appearances got to make. It's not solely on the driver, right? But because you have two pretty big titles in this team, you're even more spread thinly.
Yeah. And the thing is, when I first got into it as a driver, because I've been driving for a while, I thought it'd be kind of an easy transition. And it has not been the easiest transition, although I've been learning a lot, and it's been teaching me a lot too. Just on the back end of things, all the like me visually seeing all the contracts, because as a racing driver, you never really see too much of the sponsorship end, because what companies like to do when they sponsor is they like to give, or not give, but send their advertisement budget to the team who has a business bank account. So it's a B2B transaction, which makes it a tax write-off, or able to be tax a write-off.
Yeah.
If they just gave the money to me as an individual, it'd be harder to do that. So what happens is a lot of teams accept all the money up front, and sometimes like what you'll have is you'll have a driver who brings their own sponsors. The sponsor starts paying the team, and then the driver gets cut out. They cut the driver, and they keep the sponsors because they have the contracts together with the team. So that's a side story. But yeah, so I've been learning a lot about the sponsors, the contracts, how to keep them happy. And then I've always known that sponsors are a big, crucial part of it. But now as a team owner, I know like all of our operational costs, or a big chunk of it comes from them. Along with our back end of renting out the cars and all that type of stuff. So it's been crucial for partnership with sponsors, all the logistics behind it, when the crew flies in, who's picking up from the airport, because some of the tracks are far in the middle of nowhere, like we're in Wisconsin, Road America, and it's like a couple-hour drive. I think the closest airport was O'Hare in Chicago, which is a state away from the racetrack in Road America, Wisconsin. Yeah. So I had to strategically get all the guys, because some of our team guys aren't all in the Bay Area. They're in LA. They're in Texas, like all over the place. So like having them catch flights to be in the airport within like the same hour to catch a rental car ride or an Uber ride to the track is pretty important. lining up Airbnb dates. We have to pre-order gas. Like I said, we have to pre-order tires. If like I miss a gas order form, we show up, there's no gas. Like, what are you gonna do?
You're not racing. Yeah.
You gotta start going to teams. Be like, hey, I got like a jug. Like, could I
no.
please? I haven't done that, but I haven't seen it either. But it'd be a really bad thing to do.
Can't imagine how embarrassing that is. Hey,
dude,
you mind if I get a little gas?
Seriously. But yeah, there's all these forms for gas, tires. You have to there's rental equipment on the car. For example, like we have lights that portray our position on the track. We have a transponder, which every time we go across the start-finish line, it records our time, which is important for qualifying.
Right.
So all this stuff is also on a subscription basis from race to race.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do all these forms. And then on top of that, it's assigning tasks to people, because the last thing you want when things are getting hectic is people kind of stepping on each other's toes. You want like very defined titles for people, and a lot of if-thens, like if the car... if this happens to the car, this person and this person will handle it. If there's body damage and the tires need to be mounted still, it means if we do a practice session, we take the tires off, we take the rims and tires off, and we get them mounted with a fresh set for the next session.
Sure.
So that's what's mounted, and there's a lot that goes into that. Actually, if you want to go in the back into that, the tire guys will not take a tire straight from the car and mount a new tire on it. What you need to do is you have to scrape the wheel weights off it. You have to purge the tire. You have to take all the air out of it. You got to take the valve stem out of it. You gotta clean it, and you got to clean the tire because a lot of like dirt and rubber and things on the track stick to the tire. Mm-hmm. So if they were to balance it, it'd be off balance with all the dirt on it when it's clean. So we got to clean them, and then we can take them to the tire. And that's a full dedicated task for one guy who's just dedicated to cleaning tires, taking the wheel weights off them, and just being eligible to be mounted with a new set.
So you'll have a tire guy on your team. That is his job or her job.
Yeah.
And then you have to then go to another middleman to take care of the tires.
Yeah.
I mean, how many different middlemen is there in this process? From sponsors to tires to, everything. It sounds like
it's crazy. And that tire's it's just like a very small example of everything else that's going on. But I mean, there's so many middlemen at the track running around.
It's insanity.
It's crazy. And especially when sometimes you got like a couple hours from qualifying to the race. I think at Road America we had like 2 hours from qualifying to the race where like we're trying to make changes on the cars. We're trying to like rotate tires. We're trying to like go through data really quick to see if there's any adjustments we can make. Because there's all sorts of things, especially with because I have a 1-car team. A lot of other teams have 3-4 cars on their team. So what they can do is they can, in a practice session or in a qualifying session, if they dare, try all these different adjustments on each different car. Each different car has a different setup on it, and then they see which one works, and then they put all the cars to that one setup that worked the best. Whereas we have 1 car, so where we kind of make some educated guesses on what we think's following the track. And it's another thing, too, the grip level changes on how hot the asphalt is on the track.
Sure.
And also, there's a lot of cars that go on and off the track between our sessions, so the track also gets rubbered up. And where it gets rubbered up kind of chooses or dictates a new line that might be developing. So we have to have a guy literally watching the track. So that's kind of funny, too. But yeah, so we have to make changes. Like we have to dive through data, look on the car, see what was working, see what might not have been working, and compare it to our previous sessions' datas to see like maybe there's like a happy medium between these 2 springs or like these 2 compression rebounds, and make these calls like a few hours before the race. And that's all this is assuming we didn't have any damage from qualifying our previous session. If we have damage, we have to have what's called floaters, like the guy who is cleaning the tires or the guy who's watching the track. Maybe not so important when the car is damaged, so we got to bring him in, and it's called a floater, where he floats to the car and he starts like doing all sorts of stuff where he's needed to get the car ready to go back out for the race. Because like I said before, missing TV time or missing an air time is huge, because it obviously that's the main reason why the companies back us, the sponsors back us, and if we can't perform that, it's our biggest customer, right?
Yeah.
Other than the fans. So,
right.
Yeah.
Where do the races get played? Like where would you watch it?
So they're kind of all over. SRO, the series I'm with, used to broadcast on CBS Sports, although they're making a transition this year to YouTube streaming because they see since COVID, they ran a bunch of surveys, and I guess streaming is where it's all at now.
Yeah.
So there's talks about us being on CBS Sports, but now it's just YouTube exclusive streaming.
Okay.
There's some series that we're looking at getting into next year where it would be on TV. We're still kind of like negotiating things with that. But yeah, so it's, for us, GR Cup.
That's neat. I know. I'm curious where all that comes in. And so I think this is a good opportunity to bring it up is you talk about all the members of your team and all the different roles, all the different parts, so many moving parts. What goes into building a team like yours? How do you select the people that you have and interchanging? How do you go about that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, these people that I'm with, I've kind of always been around for like the last 10 years, even more for some of them. And when I started going towards pro racing from amateurs and I was joining these big teams, I kind of was put in a position where I had to not ditch but branch off from the people who kind of supported me through amateurs, because these big teams already had guys on the team that filled all the spots. So I was doing all that, and then at the end of the day, I was kind of getting a feeling from some of these teams that I was joining on that obviously the gentleman driver aspect, where it's very cutthroat. Like if you're not performing, because I was a driver who had the skill set, I was the fast driver that I was expected for like top podium finishes every weekend, or else why not have a gentleman driver step in and pay him $100,000, $160,000 a weekend?
Yeah.
You know, on top of all the other fast drivers who were coming through the ranks of amateurs who were also trying to get my spot as well. It's very cutthroat. So that puts you in a position where you can't complain about anything. If you complain about anything, or if it sounds like a complaint, they're like, all right, we have 100 more people waiting for this position.
Yeah.
Like, bye.
Next, see you later.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, and engineering a car is, a lot of it can be, like, for example, when a driver has characteristics they like in a car, where a very fast setup for one driver might not work for another driver.
What makes up some of those characteristics?
So there's kind of two main bodies that kind of embody it all, where if you like the rear end to drift out, which is called an oversteer, or if you like an understeer, where you like the front end, or if you like the rear end to have more grip than the front, so the front end washes out, so that you'll be going through a corner and you'll turn and the front end will give out before the rear end gives out.
Okay.
So it's just two different aspects. Personally, I like the car to kind of drift around. It's understeer, because I like to rotate the car to point towards the exit sooner, so I roll on the gas sooner. But with the other aspect, if you like a understeer car, you could actually hit the berms a bit more, and that rotates the car. So that's what that does. But
and it's personal preference is what that comes down to.
Yeah. So like you obviously have to get the car in a ballpark for a good setup to be fast.
Right.
But then that fine tune comes to driver preference. So I was working with these teams who had developmental drivers, or like past professional previous like pro drivers work on their car and like get the setup dialed in, and then I'd come in and I'd like the car to rotate a little bit, be understeering loose, almost drift around, and some of the teams would not want to make the changes because they have a tried and proven setup for the previous driver. And sometimes I get it, but I felt like joining a lot of these big teams, you're kind of like a small voice in the whole mass, you know?
Right.
So then I was realizing, I said, hey, like all the guys who helped me climb the amateur ranks, we won like 7 national championships. We won a bunch of Hoosier Super Tours, which is pretty big, Spec Miata, amateur events.
And is this the same group you're referencing? Is that tied into the 600 amateur wins?
Yeah. So we won 600. And that, a lot of people
That's
ask
a hell
me,
of a number.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of question that number too. But how we did that was, I kind of started that younger in my career, where go-kart races, they'd start early in the morning, they'd be finished around noon, probably 1, 2, they'd all be done. And the circle track races, which I do, would start at 5 o'clock. because circle track is a whole different demographic. It's a whole different situation where go-karts, like, you're not really reliant on spectators, but for circle track, like, they love the spectators. They love having the spectators around at any level.
Yeah.
So they start their events past 5 o'clock where everyone gets off work.
Yeah.
So there'd be weekends where Saturday morning I'd race go-karts. I'd race 3 different go-karts in 3 different classes. I'd wrap that up around like 2 p.m. And then I'd drive to an adjacent circle track. We'd race there that same night in a circle track race. And then I'd drive back Saturday night after it all wraps up around like 11. Some of those circle track races ended at like 11, 12, close to midnight.
Are those the ones on the, because I'm naive to this, right? So when you say circle track, is that the dirt track race ones that I see like go on Gilroy kind of? There's those ones down there.
So there's 2 different types. There's dirt track and there's asphalt.
Okay.
I did both. I kind of, when I'm saying oval track racing, because I was always doing something different. With circle track, because there's so many classes to it. There's so many different routes. But I do, to be more specific, I would do dirt midgets. I would do pavement midgets, and just that type of. I even did HPD midgets for a little bit when I was beginning. But yeah, so I would, and then after Saturday night when I'd finish the oval track race, I would drive back to a closed hotel where around the go-kart track was, and I'd wake up and I'd race go-karts again Sunday morning, and then same thing, circle track Sunday night.
So you'd have like 24, 36 hours logged in the weekend just driving alone, racing.
Yeah, I would probably have 8 races a weekend. Yeah.
So that 600 starts to make sense. You hear that number, like people are like, whoa, we just throwing around that number, but I mean, sounds like it makes sense from a young age. Yeah, that's absurd.
Especially because I entered into almost every amateur series in the U.S. where I would race go-karts, I would race circle track, and I'd race SECA NASA, which is SECA NASA is like amateur real size production car racing.
Yeah.
So I'd race Spec Miatas and that. So there's always, when I'm entered in all the amateur series, there's always an event every weekend. So there'd be, when I was probably 15, from 18, 19, I was racing almost every weekend of the year. I'd only have like 3 weekends off because there's always some amateur event to race in and keep your muscle memory sharp. Because a lot of racing is obviously building a skill set, but also muscle memory too, because as you start moving up, you start going faster and faster, and when you're approaching corners at like 120, 140 miles an hour, you have like a short window to turn in. Like there's probably a 3-foot window on the track of where you need to turn in or make the turn in to make the corner at that speed. And when you're traveling at 140 mile an hour and you need to meet a 3-foot window, it has to be perfect. And sometimes when you're in the midst of a race where there's like 3 cars all around you, it's like commuter traffic, because we're racing with like 30, 40 people in one race. It's commuter traffic at like 120, 140, and you're like looking in your mirror, seeing where everybody is. You got to make sure your shifts are correct. You got guys in your ears talking, your team's talking to you on the radio. You're looking at the engine temps, because if you're drafting for someone for too long, if you're right behind someone for too long, it's blocking the airflow, and your things don't. You need to keep things cool before you blow up.
Of course. That's important.
Yeah.
Important.
To win the race, you first got to finish it. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. You saw me laugh and chuckle there for a second, because I love the casual glaze over statement of commuter traffic at 130, 140 miles per hour. No big deal, you know?
Yeah.
So casual. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for me to ask you. I want to talk about the mentality of a driver. I mean, it's something special. It's not like, because I mean, I grew up from, I guess we'll call your generic sports background. I'm an athlete. I love sports. I love the football, baseball, basketball, so all of it, right? And there's kind of a mold of the mentality.
Yeah, totally.
Drivers are a different breed. I want to talk about kind of, what goes into that of preparing the mind and the body, as you mentioned a little bit earlier.
Yeah. I mean, growing up at such a young age, because I have the back end of my racing team is a coaching business where me growing up, I did every single amateur series, and there was no true ladder from the bottom of racing to the top, because like there's probably over 100 racing series in the US right now. Whereas if you want to become a baseball player, you want to make it to MLB, right?
Yeah.
And there's like, I'm sure there's a more well-designed ladder system to get
Sure.
there.
Yeah, there's definitely a system,
For the most part,
right? Yeah, totally.
And in racing, there's not. So on the back end, when I'm not at the track, I'm coaching kids who are talented or kids who are just interested to get through that system. So, and the biggest thing is teaching them the mindset, right? And for me, it's kind of not hard for me to teach it, but because my dad kind of instilled it into me when I was like 3 years old, going through everything, it's kind of been ingrained into me. But it's hyper focus. You can't really be emotional at all. Like as you see in fighters, when they start getting frustrated, they start like losing their precision when they're making all their movements. And with racing, there's so much like going on where like you gotta like make all your shift marks. You gotta be looking at all the gauges for the tire temps. You gotta be like on the radios with your team. You're looking in your mirrors. You're bumping people. There'll literally be people pushing you like you're going into a corner at 120, 140, and they're pushing you, bumping you, going into the corner to mess you up. And it's not illegal to do that because it's only illegal if they hit you off the track. Like
Right.
if they're bumping you and you stay on track, it's all fair game. So you'll literally have guys, we'll call them love taps, who are just love tapping you, going into the corner to mess you up. And there's so many mind games that go behind it all. So you have to be like mentally stout.
Yeah.
And like I grew up go-kart racing. My dad put me in dirt bikes. And my dad, like, he never let me complain about anything. He was like, I wasn't allowed to do like, it was pretty brutal, but I definitely saw why it is what it is. And like, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was 18, I was riding dirt bikes and I broke my back. I broke my L1, L2, L3, and then L4, and then I snapped my L5.
Holy smokes.
And I had to. It's a really long story short, but I was in bed rest for 5 months because I went through like a experimental recovery process through that, where it wasn't surgery. They actually like, because all my vertebrae were kind of like compression fracture exploded, but they stayed in place. So what they did was they just had me lay on my back for 5 months straight, and every now and then they changed some wedges I was laying on to kind of make everything mesh back together properly. But through the atrophy, I had to, after being literally sitting still in a bed for 5 months straight, like I never got up once, I had to relearn how to walk because my leg was about as thin as my wrist. So I had to like relearn how to walk. But it's a mentality thing. Like I guess a lot of people could like sit there and complain, and I was going through that was obviously brutal, but I mean, you got to look at it. Do you have a choice? Like, it's either you're going to walk again or you're not, and you got to go through the PT to walk again. So, I don't know. I think the mentality of me going through racing and looking at concrete walls, like, for example, when I was at Road America, you're looking at concrete walls at like 140 mile an hour while you're next to people bumping you, trying to on purpose mess you up. Not to the point where they want to see you crash, but they on purpose are messing with you. In racing, unfortunately, a lot of people I've known have passed away from bad crashes on dirt bikes or just cars in general.
It's dangerous. It's a dangerous sport.
It's a dangerous. It's a dangerous game, but it's kind of weird to say, but you kind of get accustomed to it. And I got accustomed to it at a young age. So when I'm seeing these scary things, it's not as bad as what new people getting into it might perceive it to be. And obviously you hate to see people pass away, especially people you kind of grew up with. But at the end of the day, like it is racing. It's when you're hitting concrete walls at 120 and you're literally going from 120, 140, 160, whatever speed you're going, and you hit a concrete wall, you're going from that speed to zero like that. The biggest thing you have is neck snaps, concussions because what happens is your brain inside your head is still traveling at that speed, and then it stops, and then your brain just smashes your skull. You get bad concussions. I've had a couple really bad ones from that. And also I've torn organs inside my body because when you come to such a halt so fast, my organs shifted down, and my trachea tore open inside my body, and I didn't really know it, but I felt fine. I was walking around afterwards, but I was brought into the medical facility because they were worried that because I tore the trach open, I was leaking unsterile air into my heart cavity. And they said if I had a infection on my heart, it'd turn out pretty bad.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of internal injuries that come with racing too when you just hit walls like that. And a lot of times, like what happened with me is like you'll get up from a crash and you'll walk away from it, and like a day later you'll have to go into like the ER room because from internal bleeding or from like ruptured organs or stuff like that. It sneaks up.
And I can imagine the natural factor of racing that comes with it is absurd amount of adrenaline, whether you crash or not. And especially if you crash, I sure can only imagine peaks adrenaline even more, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's easy to walk away from crash like, hey, I feel fine. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
And it's whether it's hours later or days later, I'm sure it sets in, right?
Yeah. And we've had some really strange, like, because your body's getting torn and twisted and weird, contorted in weird different ways. Because obviously you have safety straps holding you around, but like there's sometimes like if you tighten this strap more than this strap, like your body contorts a little bit.
Yeah.
And like we've had just really, really weird situations with all sorts of injuries. Like it's stuff you won't really see anywhere else, I guess.
Yeah. That's absurd. I can only imagine all that stuff. So I want to ask you a little bit. We talked about the team, and I want to talk about kind of what you guys base the branding off of and whatnot, because I love the format that you guys have on the website and the way you guys go about it. You have a whole academy. You talked about that already. So talk a little bit about the academy and the team and the branding side of all that with you guys.
It was always my passion to be a race car driver, but as I've been kind of going through all these years of racing, I've kind of had a newfound passion for running a team and operating a team with like a new vision. Most of the teams, I want to say, in motorsports have been established for decades, a very long time. It's almost like NFL teams. You don't hear, it would be hard to enter that, let alone hear of a new team coming up.
Yeah.
So when we kind of launched our race team, our professional race team, we wanted to kind of like put like a new school spin on it, but kind of keep the roots still intact and aligned with motorsports. So we do like a lot of online social media presence. We do like a lot of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And what I want to do and what I like to do is share as much information as we can, kind of be like open source about what we do, to the point where right up to the fence where it won't hurt us, where our competition won't kind of see the key things that we're doing to beat them. Because again, like at Nashville with the 6th place finish, we beat like 30 cars or something like that. And all the cars that we beat were with multi-million-dollar situations or close to it, you know?
Wow.
And we're doing it as a new team. And it's what I feel like it's like we're a startup company kind of swinging against Google or something like that, you know, right off the bat.
I love that reference.
And it's true competition too, because at the end of the day, you can't wonder, be like, oh, like we don't know how our startup's doing. Like at the end of the day, we're at the track, we're competing, and we get like an actual result at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I really like running the team. It's really cool with the vision and with KK, guys like KK, Frankie, Antonio. We have new guys on the team now with Joe, Craig Darian. He's a lot of people are kind of jumping onto our team because it's fun. It's not cutthroat like all the other teams. Like I said, like there's so many teams that have like a line of drivers or a line of people who are just waiting to go on, or even like a tire changer guy. Like you make a mistake, we got another guy, like you're gone. And not just like you making a mistake, but even if you don't make a mistake, you got that in the back of your mind. Like if I do, like I'm gone. Like today's my last day, and like I got to go job hunting tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
So we're not like that at all. People do make mistakes, but what I do is I take responsibility for everything. If a tire falls off or if we run out of gas, which we have in qualifying on lap 1, I don't blame anybody. I think at the end of the day, like, last thing you want to do is play a name game or kind of blame someone for something, because they know what they did. Obviously, they didn't want to send a car out with no gas, you know?
Yeah.
And we learn, and it's things like that help us build into something better from learning on experiences like that. And having that environment where people genuinely like to be around, they genuinely like the environment, I think is way better off than what other teams kind of have with their stigma.
You're 24.
Yeah.
Dude, you are so far beyond your years. We're the
Thanks.
same
Yeah.
age, but I mean, holy smokes. Hearing you talk and all the things you're doing, that's incredible. I want to ask about comparing, because I mean, you've grown up driving, obviously, and that's the first love, the first passion, but now you're talking about the team and all that and running the team and being the
Yeah.
team owner. Do you have favorites? Do you have one that you favor where you see at any point in time going forth where you would commit to maybe just driving and promote someone to operate the team for you, or vice versa?
Yeah, I was actually, before I came here this morning, I was on a meeting with my team guy. I have like meetings once a week just to kind of like keep everyone on the same page, and just like talk about ideas, or like if someone has like an idea of a different direction they want to go in terms of the team, or like ideas they think would be helpful, we kind of hear it out. Because again, we are a startup. We're kind of like a new process to everything. It's a learning curve for all of us.
Yeah.
And although we want to be a competitive motorsports team, we want to be present, we want to be professional, we also want to do things a little differently too. So one of the newest guys, or not newest guys, he's been helping me for a while, but he's now kind of stepping on the team full time, is Craig Darian, and he used to be on Ganassi's NASCAR team. I believe he was the head engineer for Ganassi for a while, and he has a lot of doors that he's opening for me after seeing because he's one of the engineers on our team that looks at all the data on the car, and how me and the car kind of work together on like where we're pulling the G-forces, how responsive I am with getting on throttle when the car is ready for it, in terms of G-load. And he likes everything he sees, and he actually really appreciates my driving, to the point where he's kind of compared me to some of the professional guys at the NASCAR Cup level that he's seen.
High praise there.
It is, and it was nice to hear, because I kind of been doing all sorts of stuff for the last couple of years, and I know I won a bunch of races in the past, but it's kind of good to hear that I still have that touch, I guess. So he's been throwing my name around. He's been opening up some doors for me to go pretty high up if I so choose, and if I have the sponsor company backing to do it too, because drivers still have to pay. I think only the top couple drivers are actually paid to be there in a lot of professional racing. With NASCAR, it's a little different, because there's so many teams, so much more money in NASCAR. They can have paid drivers. You don't really, in Formula One, you see half the drivers are kind of bringing their own budget.
Yeah.
Personally, but he's opening a lot of doors for me, and at the same time, our racing team's taking off, where so many people want to be a part of it. So many people want to join in, and they're opening, like family friends are kind of joining, and they're like, hey, like I have this connection, you could do this, blah blah blah. Even like 2 days ago, one of my family friends was saying we could get an allocation for like the new Mustang GT4 race car, which was just released, or just not even released, but presented about like a few weeks ago.
I saw it. Yeah, it's beautiful. I remember. I was stoked. It looks great.
So an allocation, I kind of need to define that before I go even further. Allocation is with big car companies, manufacturers like Toyota, Ford, Mercedes. They have a long production line of cars that they sell to the people want to just drive on the street. But there's for each manufacturer, there's a racing or motorsports branch where they take the cars from their production, or sometimes they build them from scratch, ground up, and they only build like 40 of them. 30 of them sometimes for the whole world, or just sell in the whole world, because it's very on their product line, it's very disruptive, taking cars off and kind of changing things up. So it's why they make them in such a small batch. So every time they announce a new car, like the Mustang, or like Ford did with that new Mustang race car, they have like hundreds or even thousands or even tens of thousands of people who want to buy that.
Sure.
And they go through a whole interview process, and when they choose you to be one of the 40 people to get that car, they say you have an allocation. And getting the allocation is like half the battle sometimes.
Yeah.
And then once you get the allocation, then they say, all right, now you have the first opportunity to pay for the car. We need X amount of deposit before we even start building the car. And then you have to pay the remainder by X date. None of these situations are ever free or discounted.
Yeah.
So that's always a thing. But yeah, so
But
like
the allocation alone's a big deal to
huge,
get that
huge.
the foot in the door, basically.
Yeah.
Because without that, you got nothing. You're amongst the pool of hundreds of people,
Yeah,
if not
yeah.
thousands.
If you can't get an allocation, your next big challenge is buying a team or buying a used car from a team or a backup car.
Right.
And
yeah.
those are all harder for different reasons.
Sure.
But yeah, so like I had friends who were saying like, hey, like I work with X person, or I'm colleagues with this person, and they can get us an allocation on this car. Because like behind the scenes, me being 24 years old and running a professional race team on top of racing, as I guess a lot of people are talking about us behind our backs in a good way or bad way. I don't know what people are saying. To be honest, it doesn't really bother me too much. I've been through so much, to be honest, when I was 18, I was told I was probably not going to walk again. So I like people talking behind my back for bad or I like the good, but I mean, I really couldn't care about talking people behind my back.
That's the mentality to carry,
Yeah,
though. And at
exactly.
this level, I think it's all talk is good talk. 'Cause guess what? It's getting that name out there. And well, okay, who's Tommy McCarthy Racing,
Exactly.
right? No matter it's a positive, negative.
Yeah,
light.
I think like you're saying, it's all news is good news with us right now, and a lot of people are talking about us. A lot of doors are opening. So I mean, I think right now that was the exact phone call we had with the team this morning. We're kind of like both areas are going really well. Like my personal racing career is kind of launching, and then my company, my race team is also launching. So it's like, are these gonna branch off, or is there a way to jive it together, or like how can we make both of them work, right? Especially because all the people behind me at the shop who are working, or even people like I have a couple friends who are taking photos at the track, who are helping me doing video edits. Putting in like, because those video edits, like you put together a 1 minute video, as you know, and it takes like probably like a whole weekend of like 6 hours a day. You put in 12 hours to make a 1 minute clip.
Yeah, if you're in media, exactly. And I've seen the stuff. I love the way it looks. Like I would even say I don't go that far in my editing, right? I'm not even that advanced. What I'm saying, and seeing the stuff that you guys post on your social media and whatnot is beautiful.
Yeah,
right?
I appreciate it.
It's
Thank
great.
you. I mean, that's nice to hear after all the hours we put in. You know?
It's fantastic. Yeah.
So yeah.
So let's put a theoretical out there. What does each of those routes look like for you if you were to rough it out? So if you commit to just driving and driving only, what does that look like? Do you stay with Tommy McCarthy and you put someone else there? And then same thing, vice versa. If you commit to just being the team owner, do you have to hire new drivers, right?
Yeah.
So what does that each of those routes look like?
So for me right now, we're going to try and go the NASCAR route, because that's when I grew up, I did all forms of racing, from dirt track to go-karts to oval. So if any opportunity ever arose, I'd be able to, skill set wise. And that's one of the biggest reasons why my dad had me do so much at a young age, because when my dad was racing, he was very road course oriented, and he had a door open for him to get in a NASCAR, and he had to like scramble and try to learn that skill set as fast as he could before his test day in the NASCAR, which he actually ended up doing pretty well in, and they gave him the head nod to go. But he never wanted me to be in that situation, so I've done all sorts of stuff. So now kind of doors are opening for us to go towards NASCAR, go towards the circle track route for me personally. And we're going to try and get a couple tests locked in a high-level NASCAR team. And beforehand, I'm probably going to go, once I find out the track, the date, I'm going to try and go to that track in a similar car or something adjacent. I'm going to sign up as someone else. I'll sign up as Cano Pagan and just get some laps in,
Yeah.
So people, like, when I first go out, they think it's my first time ever there, and I actually do pretty well. And sometimes they're called shootouts, which you're invited to, where they get 5 drivers they're interested in. Because each year, I mean, you'd be surprised, like thousands of kids email teams to get a shot, to get a test.
Yeah.
And what they do is, out of these thousands and thousands, they choose 5, sometimes even less, like 3. They invite them out to the test day, and then they have these 3 kids go against their drivers who are already in the seat. And it's very cutthroat, where at the end of the day, the fastest driver usually gets the seat for the next year. and you're going against kids who are hungry, kids who are kind of working their way up through the amateur branch, and you're also going against people who have been in that exact same car for the last couple of years and know every inch of what that car is capable of, you know.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try and we actually are very close to securing a test day right now.
It's awesome.
It's just the financial part of it that we're looking at. It's doable for us right now to pay the test day, but I don't want to spend X amount of money on my personal career that would put the team with all my guys who put in so much effort in a hard spot too, you know.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at with that right now, and that's a good segue to the team. For the team, like I mentioned earlier, I want to make a foundational ladder from the bottom of racing to the top, and that's what I wanted to provide with my team, with coaching, with instruction, with guidance, and all that type of stuff. And what I've done so far is I've bought and worked on all my cars that I've used from amateur to where I'm at now, and it's very unique, I guess. A lot of people just pay programs to show up and just like give them a car and all that, where I actually worked on all my cars. I put them together myself. I own the cars. A lot of people don't own cars anymore. They rent them. So I owned all the cars. So now
they rent the cars to race them.
Yeah.
How does?
Yeah, which is a very, very crazy thing.
I feel like that'd be risky.
Actually, it's kind of I kind of like totally overlooked that this entire podcast, but that's a very big part of racing, because this is gonna sound crazy, but some of these cars are like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even $1 million cars.
Absolutely.
And for a driver who's hungry, looking to get his jump into racing, he can't pay $1 million bill, but he can pay like maybe $100,000 bill to get one shot in a weekend. And there is insurance companies that cover motorsports, but it's ridiculous, and there's a lot of if-then clauses that make them not cover certain situations, and it's very, very pricey. I think when we were doing racing in 2019, it was like $10,000 a weekend for insurance on the race car.
Holy smokes!
Yeah. So when you're looking at that, you're kind of weighing like, should I get insurance? Should I not? Because like at the end of the year, if you pay insurance every race, you could have bought another car.
Exactly.
So if you don't crash, you could have had 2 cars.
So it's based off the track record of the driver. You crash a lot, maybe a good investment, right?
Literally. And usually, typically, the higher up you are in the field, like the top 5, top 10 guys are all very, like, even though it's a lot of bumping and rubbing, it's all calculated, and they're very skilled in not usually causing wrecks, typically.
Yeah.
In the mid pack, we call it the wolf pack. That's where all the things go down. That's where you'll get a lot of mixed talent of kids who are just like jumping in, trying to prove themselves, who are very like aggressive, or just gentleman drivers who are paid to be there and they make mistakes, you know. So that's always a problem. But so renting is a big part of motorsport. I'd say it's like 85 to 90% of motorsports is renting rides. And
in all levels and classes and everything, right? Of every aspect.
I'd say except for when you get to the very, very, very top.
Of course, the very top. Yeah, the 1%.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
But everything beneath that.
Yeah, everything beneath that's mostly rental. Yeah.
That's insane. I would have never guessed that at any point in time.
Yeah.
It sounds weird to hear that because you get a rental car and it's like, oh, the last thing I want to do is of course I'm talking about casual driving, but
yeah.
It just sounds funny to connect the word rental and racing. It's like, no, that's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah, actually, I do kind of as a side topic. I know a couple drivers who, when they've never been to a track before, they actually go to Hertz or they go to a rental car company. They get a car and they just go to a racetrack and do like a track day in the rental car.
What?
And just get some laps. Yeah, I've seen it.
And just to see the track is why they do that?
Yeah, so I knew a guy, I'm not going to name names, but he hasn't been to Laguna Seca recently, and Laguna Seca recently was repaved, and it's a whole different characteristic. And he was going to be racing in a series called Trans Am 2, or TA2 for short. And those are very heavy, high horsepower cars, and they're very relatable to like a Hellcat. So what he did is he rented a Hellcat a couple weeks before the race, entered into a track day at Laguna Seca, and drove the rental Hellcat around the track.
The fact that companies like Hertz even have Hellcats available for rental.
Oh
It
yeah,
was absurd.
yeah. Or maybe it was a scat pack, but it was something nuts. Yeah,
More horsepower than necessary for a rental
Exactly.
car. I think my
Yeah.
mom got a rental 5.0. It was like a 2000, probably 18, 19 5.0. And I've never driven one. I've never driven a newer car like that. I have an old truck and whatnot, nothing with crazy horsepower. And I remember I was like, let me take this thing out really quick. And I was just blown away with the get up on those things. That thing got sideways so fast, so quick. As a rental, it's just crazy.
And my dad and I were talking about that because a lot of our sponsors or a lot of people we work with have some really high-end cars. And some of the people I do driver coaching for are executives at high companies and that are local. So I do driver coaching for like the McLaren track day. I do driver coaching for all this sorts of stuff. And you see these guys, some of these guys come from all over the world, and some of them have never driven a car before, and they get brought in here. And actually, like one of the guys, he was from the UK, and he would just take the bus and bike to work every day. And then he was sent here, got a really well-paying job, and bought a Nissan GTR as his first car ever.
First car ever, go right for the GTR.
So, and the thing is, like, we do driver coaching, and the first thing we do is, like, I hop in the car, and I give him, like, a parade lap where we go, like, really slow pace, and I kind of just, like, point out where, like, the corner workers are, where the flag stations are, like, where you want to brake, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go in the passenger seat, and I kind of, like, walk them through these things. But it's crazy, the cars these days, that they're selling to just everyday people. Like, my dad and I were talking, like, some people should be, like, there should be like a higher level of driver license test for cars that go over 200 mile an hour on the street.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's crazy that people that get behind the wheel of these cars that they don't realize the torque and horsepower behind them. They just hop in like it's a Prius. Oh yeah, just hop in and drive, right? And then you just hear about the horror stories that come from whether it's tragic stuff or just wrecking these perfectly fine, beautiful cars. You know, because they're undereducated, don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. You get in trouble quick with some of those fast cars.
Oh, so easily. So as we kind of wrap things up here, I wanted to ask you about the last thing I want to know is going forth for you. You talked about NASCAR, and what is the overall goals? What are we looking for, grand scheme, coming for the team, for you? What are the hopes and dreams going forth, whether it's 1 year or 5 years, 10 years?
So for me personally, I would like to do some sort of tests in NASCAR trucks soon, hopefully this year, if not next year. We want to do some ARCA races next year, which is just under trucks. It's like tier 4 on the top level of NASCAR. We want to do some cherry pick 3 races in that, kind of get my juices flowing in that, and then go into trucks. I want to do a full season in trucks in 2025. And then from there, we want to move to Xfinity, which is the second level of NASCAR. And Xfinity sounds like it's all about attrition. What teams are looking for, the Cup teams, because that's the biggest scouting area for NASCAR, is they're looking for not just a fast driver, but a driver who is consistent, doesn't crash the car, has equipment every weekend. And the biggest thing is has a financial backing to keep showing up day in, day out. Mm-hmm. Because that's what's most appealing these days.
Yeah.
So that's my personal racing goals for my team. I would like to continue moving that up from GR Cup to GT4 to GT3. And these are all like sports car divisions for Grand Touring 4, Grand Touring 3. And just keep on like building an environment where kids can, because we still have all of our amateur race cars, which are Spec Miatas, goat karts, stuff like that, where a kid could say, hey, like we want guidance from the lowest level, we're interested, or hey, like I'm already at this level, I want to move up. We have all the equipment to facilitate and kind of keep that dream alive for a lot of kids who are like me, who are kind of confused going through the motorsports world.
I think about the coming up. I said one more thought, but I just thought of another one I have to ask you. Is I just went and saw that Gran Turismo movie. Uh-huh. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, so I had no idea about that story. You know what it's about, though?
It's the sim racing, right?
It's the sim racing.
Yeah.
I was clueless going. I went and saw it with my sister. I didn't do any research into it, but it's a true story, fully. That it's guy is a sim racer, and then Nissan got him started in, find the best sim racers, and turn into a full blown race car driver. How much connecting those two things? How much is like sim racing realistic? Do you see that
Yeah.
often in your world that people will go from sim to driving or even to practice,
Yeah.
use sim?
I think sim is definitely the best bang for your buck, to get seat time, to get practice, to understand tracks. A lot of the tracks I use iRacing and Assetto Corsa. All those tracks are laser scanned, so they're very identical. I could get a lap time in the sim within like 2/10 of my actual real life lap time.
Oh, wow.
So it's good practice. However, when I first started on the sim, because I kind of had the opposite approach of a lot of people have. Like a lot of people start sim racing and they get into real cars.
Yeah.
Whereas I was in real cars for the most of my life, and then I started getting into sim racing when it came out. All my muscle memory was triggered by G-force feel, like in my
Right.
butt, in the seat.
Yeah.
So like when I'd feel a certain, or when I'd feel the rear end coming around, I knew what to do with my hands to catch it.
Rather than visual, right? Because in sim,
Exactly.
it's all visual.
It's all
right?
visual cues. So at first I was like really upset because I was like not I wasn't bad, but I wasn't doing as well as I was in real life in the sim. And a lot of kids who I was beating in real life were beating me in the sim, and I was getting frustrated, and I was about to like throw it all away, and I was like, you know what, like I think if I could get the sim down, I think it'd add to the skill set. And what it did is just like what you're saying, it kind of moved up my visual skill set, like looking at things,
Yeah.
being able to like analyze the situations a lot more, setting up like visual markers for my turn-ins, for my brakes, when I get on the brakes, when to shift. And the biggest thing I've seen the sim help me with so far is tracks. I use it for tracks I've never been to. I could learn what gear I should be in at certain areas,
Yeah.
when I should be on the brake, and like what a good lap time would be.
Yeah.
And even on the sim, I can send my data to our engineers, and we can kind of have a good idea of what to do with the car before we even show up to the track.
Right.
So I felt like at first it was scary, and obviously new things are usually scary for a lot of people, but if you can kind of jump into it and like harness it and kind of figure out how you can make it work and advance yourself, it works out.
Isn't the technology insane how accurate it is? I mean,
Yeah.
between the simulator itself of the representing the car and then the tracks, how spot on. You said they're laser
Yeah.
mapped out, right?
Yeah.
Spot on. It's insanity.
Yeah, it's insane. And I think if I had the time, now that I'm running the team, on top of racing, I don't really have too much free time at all.
Doesn't sound like
And
it.
I feel like every moment, like last night I played video games for the first time in like 3 years, and I was awful. But like I feel like every time I sit back and I watch Netflix, or I like try to play a video game, like there's so many things that I could be doing that, like for example, like reaching out to new sponsors. I do like thousands of cold calls a week, or I could have been doing a cold call. I could have been doing a follow-up email. I could have been like better planning our logistics for the next race. Like I was like, oh, does this guy have his plane flight? Do we have a rental car for this race? Or
Yeah.
like all this sorts of stuff. Like I just can't relax when I want to, which is brutal. But one of the biggest things I would like to do is just get on the sim and just get more laps in, because it is worth time. It is does help muscle memory to a point. I think it doesn't give bad habits, but for me personally, it kind of conflicts with my muscle memory a little bit, because the feedback in the steering wheel isn't identical to what it is in real life.
Right.
And it to the point it almost throws off my muscle memory a little bit.
Mm.
So what I try to do on the sim is I try to get all my braking markers found at new tracks, find what gears I should be in, and kind of find the general groove of where I should be on the track. And that's what I like to do. And then kind of just get that down.
Yeah.
I would at some point, if I ever had the time, to enter into some esports races just to see how you do,
Yeah.
just for fun. And I've been asked about that a lot, and I wish I had the free time to do that. Except
Sure.
there's a long qualifying process to do that, and I just really do not have the time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's neat, man. I've really enjoyed our conversation here. You're a fascinating dude. As I said, you're way beyond your years. Seeing the way that you spread yourself so thin yet so effectively, and as you're well-oiled machine, pun intended, from the team and yourself and the way that you operate. So I've had a fantastic time. Do you have any exiting pieces, anything you want to call out before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I just I'd like to say a special thanks to everybody behind me, because obviously I am trying to do so much myself, but it would be impossible if I didn't have all the people behind me. Like KK, Antonio, Frankie, Craig Darian. I got my dad who's helping me out, Joe Krasmensky, Dave Marmon. So many people amongst our sponsors too. Like I had Brian Cross who's helping us out, 40 Hour Staffing, Walter Hill Sunglasses, Country Water, Children's Burn Foundation. So many people behind me, and so many more people growing, and supporters and fans, and even kids I went to high school with who are like buying our merch to keep us going every bit more. So I really appreciate everybody who's backing us through this venture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how can you not? I mean, I'm a fan already,
Yeah,
man.
thanks.
I'm looking forward to watching the rest of your journey and your story as you go forth. So make sure you guys follow Tommy on all his social medias. I'll make sure to tag him below between his Instagram and website and so on and so forth. And I want to make sure I get out to one of your races.
Yeah,
I want to come
seriously.
to one of your races here.
Yeah,
local.
you should. It'd be a great time. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be in the loop. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and go show Tommy some love. And with that being said, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Tommy.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.